once again, let me just reintroduce myself. I'm Bruno Behrend. I'm the director for the Center for School Reform at the Heartland Institute. Heartland's mission is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to America's social and economic problems. And as I said earlier, this idea of Heartland's executive director and president, just on a chance meeting with Ben Austin, discovered this thing called the Parent Trigger. We came back, found it to be a fantastic idea, kind of worked on it a little bit, looked at it, researched it, and produced our policy brief, which is in the back for all of you, and we have extra copies if you want to bring some for your friends, relatives, acquaintances, and legislators. And then we promote this idea everywhere we can so that more and more people understand its availability and what it needs, and then they'll talk to Gloria, they'll talk to Democrats for Education Reform, or Heartland, or anybody else who has heard about it to promote it across the country in the states and cities. Here's what I think is the most significant thing about the Parent Trigger legislation and parental empowerment legislation, and that is that it changes the political dynamic of education reform. My view is that we've had education reform ideas on the table for decades. Maybe you want to go back to Milton Friedman's proposal of the vouchers in 1959 or 1960, and you can say, wow, that was an interesting idea. Why did it never take root? And all of the different reasons why, and everybody's perception at the time was that education was working, and in the 1960s you could make the argument that at some level it was. So you've had this problem with the political dynamic. People who want to reform education walk into legislators' offices with white papers, and the people who don't want to reform education walk into legislators' offices with campaign checks. Not really an even playing field. Then you have a situation where the people walking into the legislator's office are a bunch of parents, and they say, I want to be empowered to have an impact on my child's school. And that right there changes the entire political dynamic. And I would be one of those people who would make the case that education reform is no longer really an academic debate. To be sure, there are good ways to do things, bad ways to do things, transparency and implementation. These are all things that are debatable and should be talked about. But they don't go to the point where, oh, the existing system works and will work and will continue to work and your ideas don't. The fact of the matter is, as Mark so eloquently pointed out, these reform ideas do work, and they work because there's a different dynamic in place. You have empowered parents. And a parent who's empowered to move to the northern suburbs or the western suburbs, or to move into a school district and afford the homes, that's an empowered parent. A parent who can get their kid into a magnet school because they've done that amount of work and their kid gets in, that's an empowered parent. But a kid who's trying to change McKinley School in Compton, or a parent in LAUSD or in an Austin neighborhood here in Chicago, short of being able to get into a limited number of what you might call alternatives, they're not empowered. And this empowers it. Let me give you a couple of examples how. One of the things that opponents of the Parent Trigger say is, well, you're empowered, you can go and elect your school board. Well, yeah, that's easy, except for the fact that you have to really know how to organize, and you have to really know how to get stuff going to actually impact a single school board race. Then you have to win 4 of 7 seats. And then if you win 4 of 7 seats, those 4 reformers have to battle an entrenched system that knows, it literally knows, it can wait them out. Yeah, go crazy, Ron Huberman. In 4 years, you're going to be gone. We're still going to be here. And you're watching that happening right here in Illinois right now, where the new interim chief is basically doing everything he can to undo Huberman's reforms. And is it debatable as whether Huberman did all the right things? Sure, that's debatable. The fact is, he tried to reform and the system fought back. Michelle Reed, everybody loves the videos that she's done and the movies that she's been in and the impact that she had in DC. And now Michelle Reed's gone. And there's some good news and various different kinds of news coming out of Washington, D.C. right now, but the system comes back. What's so important about the Parent Trigger is that instead of a vote for a school board member, it offers real empowerment. the parents can say, we are extracting this school from the existing system and we're putting in place a different governance system or a different education option in this school that we chose and we worked on. And the important thing about that is that it's real. It's not a bureaucratic option or another pat on the head and saying, yes, we're gonna do a committee and we're gonna study this issue and we're gonna do this, that, or the other thing. And that, I would argue, is an example of true local control. It's not a local control as in a diluted vote for 3 out of 7 or 4 out of 7 people on a school board. It's a real local control where the parents take control of an option for that school. To be sure, Chicago has experience with parents, quote unquote, running schools with local school councils, and there are ways to implement this, as Mark talked about, the mechanism and the modules. But it is true local control. Getting to Mark's point about mechanisms and modules, one of the things that bears discussion here, particularly for looking at states like Illinois and charter expansion, but across the country, are what are some of the mechanisms and can they be improved? Gloria can probably tell you much more about the process of getting the parent trigger passed. Based on the political needs, it actually had to be a very, very general, I would say, piece of legislation that left a lot of the rules drafting to the State Board of Education. But there's ways that you can take the trigger and make it fit more closely options in your state, or quite frankly, as in here in Chicago, in your city. Rahm Emanuel campaigned on the parent trigger, and you may see an option here in Chicago because Rahm Emanuel has power over the school board. It's basically a mayoral control city to implement the parent trigger in any way that he really wants. And what might he do if he wanted to do that? A couple of options that Heartland discussed that provide improvement would be to change the mechanism. The current mechanism in California is that once the parents choose an option, the district can, if they want to, turn around and say, we don't accept this option. They put it in writing at a regularly scheduled meeting, and then they say they have to choose one of the other 3 options. This brings into discussion whether or not there's a weak trigger or a strong trigger bill. I think the concept is so powerful that any parent trigger bill is strong because it changes the dynamic. But a parent trigger that further empowers parents we would make the case that it's actually a stronger trigger. So instead of giving a district a veto, one of the things we would say is, well, if the parents did this properly, if they followed the process, why should the district have a veto? The counter argument is, well, the district is the local political unit of control. I would make the counter argument to that, saying that it's the parents that have, based on the state definition, the school has failed. And if it's a failing school, the parents should have the right to change a failed model. So that this brings in other discussions as far as how the parent trigger can be implemented, and say maybe if the school is not failing, the district gets a veto, but in terms of a failing school, the district does not get a veto. So these are some of the many, many malleable, implementable options in cities like Chicago or across the country in different states. Another thing that Mark has already discussed at length is that Chicago, perhaps unlike LA or perhaps unlike some other areas or rural areas where a school might be failing, has a vast, vast infrastructure of private schools that are proven to work, and that is Chicago's Catholic school system, which right now is, quite frankly, underutilized. There are also schools that have been closing. So Chicago would be a very, very effective place to test a voucher option for the parent trigger, where the parents were saying, well, we would like to take advantage of a voucher at 75% or 80% of the school's funding, which actually it actually benefits the district financially up to a point, because then it has, the student is the responsibility of somebody else, but they have more money that they can focus on the schools and the children that may need it who are remaining in the district. So that would be more of a different module option. I want to really quickly talk about other things that develop on the module side, and that is online learning is beginning to take root. And I can go into more detail if you have any questions about it, but blended charters like rocket ship in California, Carpe Diem in Arizona. There is a KIPP blended charter in California, and what a blended charter is it takes advantage of computer learning time supplemented by the teacher. And what happens is we're finding that the computers can rapidly bring students through the boring stuff, learning phonetic sounds or doing the algorithm of long division, and the teachers then can become very, very effective at connecting the dots and adding enrichment to it. So if there's an online or a virtual option in a state to make sure that the trigger could include that option for a parent who wants it. These are just various different ways you can structure the law. There's mechanics that you can structure as far as how the petitions are done. There may be a benefit to having a very, very thinly written law that has the commissioner develop a lot of the rules and regs around it, or you may want to come up with a very specific one. Another thing that should go mentioned, because it's an example here in Illinois, is Illinois has a what's called a conversion charter law, as does Georgia, as does Florida. And a conversion charter, basically, it's already a parent trigger. The only problem is it's not with the parents alone. It allows, it forces them to get the assent of the majority of the administrators and teachers, or the majority of the teachers at the school. What they did in Florida, very simply, is they, and I don't know if it's passed yet, but the parent trigger is simply going to be enacted by changing parents and teachers to parents or teachers. So all of a sudden, parents are now allowed to flip a school into a charter or another option under Florida law just by changing and to or. These are various ways, and that could be done, for example, here in Illinois very easily. I kind of wrote the bill in my sleep. You have to see if I can actually type it up somewhere and hand it to someone who knows what to do with it. But those are just some various different things that are out there. I want to very quickly end with this. From the free market side of the education reform debate, we've been accused at times of promoting silver bullets. Vouchers are silver bullets, charters are silver bullets, online learning are silver bullets, and I'd have to agree that there is no one silver bullet. There is no one thing that's going to magically appear and change education. We certainly know that dumping more money into the existing system is not a silver bullet, although there are probably people who could use more resources. So at the risk of being politically incorrect, I will put it this way. Vouchers, charters, open enrollment, rapid expansion of improved schools, virtual charter schools, distance learning, and even tuition tax credits as they exist in places like Florida and Arizona. These might all be thought of as silver bullets. What's the genius behind the parent trigger is that the parent trigger is the gun. It's the delivery mechanism that empowers parents to take and make use of many of these options that are out there for the benefit of their children, and that's what changes the dynamic. Thank you very much, and for that we'll open up the floor for questions.